The shadow of doubt surrounds Iran's nuclear ambitions. For decades, Iran's nuclear program has been a source of international concern. The Islamic Republic maintains that its nuclear ambitions are purely peaceful, focused on energy production and medical research. However, the international community, particularly Western powers, remains skeptical. This skepticism stems from Iran's past secrecy surrounding its nuclear activities and its continued development of technologies with potential military applications. The specter of a nuclear-armed Iran has cast a long shadow over the Middle East, raising tensions and fueling anxieties among its neighbors, most notably Israel and Saudi Arabia. These concerns are rooted in deep-seated historical rivalries, geopolitical calculations, and the volatile nature of the region itself. The possibility of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons represents a fundamental shift in the regional balance of power with potentially catastrophic consequences. Understanding Iran's nuclear ambitions and the reasons behind the anxieties of Israel and Saudi Arabia is crucial to navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of the Middle East and preventing a dangerous escalation of tensions. The stakes are incredibly high and the world watches with bated breath as this nuclear drama unfolds. For Israel, Iran's nuclear ambitions represent nothing short of an existential threat. This fear is deeply ingrained in Israel's history and its experience as a small nation surrounded by often hostile neighbors. The memory of the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were systematically murdered, fuels a belief that Israel's right to exist is constantly under threat. Adding to this fear is the rhetoric of Iranian leaders, some of whom have called for Israel's destruction. While the Iranian government insists that this rhetoric is aimed at Israel's policies, not its existence, such statements are perceived as genuine threats by the Israeli public and leadership. Israel views a nuclear-armed Iran as capable of holding its very existence hostage. The potential for nuclear blackmail, or even a nuclear attack, weighs heavily on Israeli strategic thinking. This fear is compounded by the geographical realities. Israel is a small country and even a limited nuclear strike could have devastating consequences. This perceived existential threat has shaped Israel's approach to Iran's nuclear program, leading to a policy of preemptive strikes and covert operations aimed at delaying or sabotaging Iran's nuclear progress. Israel's actions are driven by a conviction that it cannot afford to wait for diplomacy to fail, and that it must act decisively to protect its security. Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam and home to its holiest sites, views itself as the leader of the Sunni Muslim world. Iran, with its Shiite majority and revolutionary ideology, represents a direct challenge to Saudi Arabia's regional influence and ambitions. This rivalry is not merely about religious differences, it's about power, influence, and control over the resource-rich Persian Gulf. A nuclear-armed Iran would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the region, potentially tipping the scales in Tehran's favor. Saudi Arabia fears that Iran would feel emboldened to assert its influence more aggressively, supporting its allies and proxies in regional conflicts, and undermining Saudi interests across the Middle East. The two countries are already engaged in a fierce rivalry playing out in proxy wars and political maneuvering across the region, from Yemen to Lebanon. The Saudis fear that a nuclear Iran would escalate these conflicts, potentially dragging the region into a wider war. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia worries that Iran's nuclear ambitions could spark a regional arms race, with other countries feeling vulnerable, seeking their own nuclear capabilities. Such a scenario would be disastrous for the Middle East, drastically increasing the risk of nuclear proliferation and conflict. Iran's nuclear program has been a subject of intense scrutiny and speculation for decades. The country possesses significant technical expertise and resources, including uranium enrichment facilities. While Iran insists that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, its activities have raised alarm bells within the international community. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog, has expressed concerns about Iran's lack of transparency and its enrichment of uranium to levels that approach weapons grade. While Iran claims it needs this enriched uranium for medical isotopes and research reactors, the potential for diversion to weapons production remains a serious concern. Iran's ballistic missile program, capable of delivering conventional warheads over long distances, further complicates the picture. While Iran maintains that its missiles are not designed for nuclear weapons, the development of such delivery systems alongside its nuclear program raises serious questions about its ultimate intentions. The exact timeline for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon remains uncertain. estimates vary depending on factors such as the level of enrichment achieved, technical hurdles, and potential external interference. However, the consensus among experts is that Iran possesses the scientific knowledge and infrastructure to develop a nuclear weapon within a relatively short time frame if it chooses to do so. Facing what it perceives as an existential threat, Israel has adopted a multi-pronged approach to counter Iran's nuclear ambitions. This strategy combines diplomacy, covert operations, and the implicit threat of military action. Israel has consistently sought to rally international pressure on Iran, urging sanctions and diplomatic isolation to compel Tehran to abandon its nuclear ambitions. However, Israel has also shown a willingness to act unilaterally, outside of the framework of international diplomacy. The Israeli intelligence services, renowned for their capabilities, have been implicated in numerous covert operations targeting Iran's nuclear program. These operations have ranged from cyber attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities to the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists. Israel has also repeatedly hinted at the possibility of direct military action against Iran's nuclear facilities. While such a strike would carry significant risks and uncertainties, Israel views it as a last resort to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. The Israeli Air Force possesses advanced capabilities, and the possibility of an Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear sites remains a constant source of tension in the region. Israel's strategy is a delicate balancing act, seeking to delay Iran's nuclear progress while avoiding a wider regional conflict. However, as Iran moves closer to the nuclear threshold, the margin for error narrows, and the risks of miscalculation and unintended escalation increase dramatically. Section 6. Ripples of Fear. Saudi Arabia's response to a nuclear Iran. Saudi Arabia views the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran with deep unease, fearing for its security and regional standing. The kingdom has responded to this perceived threat by bolstering its own defenses, seeking closer security ties with Western powers, and exploring its own potential nuclear options. Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in modernizing its armed forces, acquiring advanced weaponry from the United States and other Western countries. The kingdom has also sought to strengthen its intelligence capabilities to better monitor Iran's activities and counter its influence in the region. Recognizing the limitations of its own military capabilities, Saudi Arabia has deepened its strategic partnership with the United States, relying on Washington's security umbrella for protection against external threats. The kingdom has also sought to build closer ties with other regional powers, such as Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, to counter Iran's influence. Perhaps most concerningly, Saudi Arabia has hinted at the possibility of pursuing its own nuclear program if Iran crosses the nuclear threshold. While the kingdom currently lacks the technical capacity to enrich uranium and build nuclear weapons, it possesses vast financial resources and could potentially acquire nuclear technology from other countries. Section 7. A Tangled Web. The Global Chessboard. The Iranian nuclear issue is not simply a regional problem, it has significant implications for global security and the international order. The potential for a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, triggered by Iran's nuclear ambitions, is a nightmare scenario that could destabilize the entire region and beyond. The international community has been deeply divided on how to address the Iranian nuclear challenge. The United States, under different administrations, has oscillated between diplomacy and sanctions, seeking to pressure Iran into curbing its nuclear program. However, these efforts have yielded mixed results, with Iran proving adept at exploiting divisions within the international community. Russia and China, both permanent members of the UN Security Council, have often sided with Iran, opposing harsh sanctions and advocating for a diplomatic solution. However, both countries also have their own strategic interests in the region and are wary of a nuclear-armed Iran. The European Union, which played a key role in negotiating the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, has been trying to salvage the agreement after the US withdrawal in 2018. However, European efforts have been hampered by Iranian breaches of the deal and the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign. The Iranian nuclear issue is a complex web of competing interests, historical grievances, and ideological differences. Finding a lasting solution that addresses the security concerns of all parties involved will require a concerted effort from the international community, based on diplomacy, compromise, and a shared commitment to preventing nuclear proliferation. Section 8. The brink of chaos. Potential consequences of a nuclear Iran. The potential consequences of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons are far-reaching and deeply concerning. The most immediate impact would be a dramatic escalation of tensions in the Middle East, with Israel and Saudi Arabia feeling increasingly threatened and vulnerable. A nuclear-armed Iran could embolden Tehran to adopt a more assertive foreign policy, challenging the regional order and potentially sparking conflict with its neighbors. The risk of miscalculation and unintended escalation would increase significantly, raising the specter of a devastating regional war with global implications. The potential for a nuclear arms race in the Middle East is another nightmare scenario. If Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, other countries in the region, feeling threatened, might feel compelled to develop their own nuclear capabilities. Such a development would be disastrous, dramatically increasing the risk of nuclear proliferation and conflict in one of the world's most volatile regions. Furthermore, a nuclear-armed Iran could embolden terrorist groups, potentially providing them with access to nuclear materials or expertise. The consequences of such a development are too horrific to contemplate. The global economy, heavily reliant on oil and gas from the Persian Gulf, would also be severely impacted by a nuclear crisis in the Middle East. Disruptions to energy supplies would send shockwaves through the global economy, leading to price spikes, economic instability, and potential social unrest. Section 9. An uncertain future, navigating the path to peace. The path to resolving the Iranian nuclear crisis is fraught with challenges, but the pursuit of a peaceful solution must remain a top priority for the international community. Diplomacy, while difficult and often frustrating, remains the only viable option to prevent a catastrophic conflict in the Middle East. Renewed efforts are needed to engage Iran in meaningful dialogue, addressing its legitimate security concerns while insisting on its compliance with international non-proliferation norms. A return to the JCPOA, while not perfect, could serve as a starting point for broader negotiations on regional security and arms control. Building trust and fostering understanding between Iran and its neighbors, particularly Israel and Saudi Arabia, is crucial. Dialogue mechanisms, confidence-building measures, and regional security arrangements could help to reduce tensions and create a more stable security environment. Ultimately, the goal should be a Middle East free of nuclear weapons, where all countries feel secure and respected. Achieving this vision will require patience, perseverance, and a shared commitment to peace from all parties involved. The stakes are too high and the potential consequences of failure too grave to allow the Iranian nuclear crisis to fester and escalate.